Hi, I'm Bob Hoose.
I'm Kristin Smith.
And I'm Adam Holz.
And welcome to another Plugged In podcast. You know, at Plugged In, we have often talked about how media impacts us. Day to day, everything that we consume tends to impact our lives, even though in our society, a lot of times people say, no, that doesn't have any impact at all.
Yes.
Common sense tells us that it does, and it also tells us that as different genders, men and women, it impacts us differently.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a number of science studies that have said the exact same thing. There was one that was published in Applied Cognitive Psychology. How's that for a mouthful?
Is that your evening reading?
I do all the time.
Rest
Those kinds of magazines stacked on my desk. Anyway, the 2016 study that talked about how men and women actually go to the movies and see totally different things on the screen, where they'll come away with remembering different aspects, and it actually seems pretty typical of what we would expect, stereotypical, like that women walk away thinking about a lot of the emotional aspects on screen, whereas guys think about the action and the violence, and cars. You know, cars are always a big thing for guys too. But anyway, all of that to say that, so we know that media impacts us differently. What I thought we'd talk about today is looking at you guys who are both parents and are in different stages of that parental process, but also I wanted to know how you thought your parenthood impacted how you consume and process media. General thoughts, what do you think, Adam?
Well, you know, my best illustration of that was something that happened right after our first child was born. This is a small confession. My wife and I were big CSI fans back in the day, and after we got married, it was one of the very, very few shows that I would say most weeks we had to tune in at a certain time for you youngsters. It was broadcast at a certain time. That's the only time you could see it.
TV actually came on a schedule.
Exactly. And after our son was born, my wife's reaction to the violence and the gore on the show was almost like somebody had flipped a switch. All of a sudden, it bothered her a great deal more. And so I think for better or worse, probably worse, I didn't have that reaction as much as she did. Yeah. But I think it illustrates how when you have children, all of a sudden it creates a completely different filter for the way you interact with entertainment and stuff that you might not have given a second thought about as a non-parent. All of a sudden, it impacts you emotionally in a different and more powerful way. Well, and so it really took me by surprise, actually.
You know, I mean, you were talking about your wife, but I think guys, as dads, you know, we do sometimes suddenly have our eyes opened by the fact that the stuff that we're reading or watching or consuming in one form or another does have an impact on our kids. Totally. I remember as a young dad when one of my children said, you know, Dad, you shouldn't read those Stephen King books or something to that effect because it's horror and look at all the negative things. And I stopped and thought, well, you know what? They're right. Yeah. I mean, there are certain aspects of some of the books that I may have picked up that might not be that great.
Yeah, true story.
What about you, Kristin?
Yeah, I think shows involving women and children have always sort of bothered me, but after having a baby, it was amplified. Like it became this really harsh reality where anytime a woman is hurt or abused or taken advantage of and it involves a child, I have a really difficult time stomaching anything like that. It's almost impossible for me to watch.
Well, you didn't have that reaction before? I sound like a prosecuting attorney.
I know. Yes. No, it was too much. Like it's become almost completely unbearable. Like,
so your sensitivity really
absolutely
changed.
It's heightened. And even to violence and things where I think, okay, my son would watch this one day. I don't want him watching this. Some of the shows that I really enjoy, as I start to watch these things, I'm like, man, I really don't want my baby saying this?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and that brings to mind for me actually a review that you just recently wrote focusing on The Handmaid's Tale,
Yeah.
which is for those of you who've never heard of it,
Yeah.
it's a very popular, well, actually it was made by Hulu,
Yeah,
right?
it's a Hulu series.
It's an original series, but it's gotten a lot of press and a lot of people have
Yes.
been talking about it. But you talked about your reaction to that series. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I guess a bit of a spoiler. I won't give the whole thing away, but as The Handmaid's Tale, the entire idea is that they're set in this dystopian universe where women now that are able to conceive, much of them aren't, but the ones that are taken into these homes and raped by the husbands, and then they bear a child.
Not their own husbands.
No, someone
else's.
else's. Yeah, they bear a child for that family and are not allowed to keep their children that they had, and then they're sent to the next family to do the same thing. And so I sat down to watch this show, and it was so hard. Like I watched it. I watched one episode to get an idea because I'd never seen it, and then I watched the other one that I reviewed just to understand what was happening. And in the midst of this woman being abused and taken advantage of, but then when the child entered the picture, how she wasn't allowed to connect with her child, or how they just don't value baby girls or really babies in general, it like hurt my heart to watch. It really upset my spirit. And so I went home and there was a lot of like praying and figuring out like, why am I still so heavy? I felt heavy even watching it, and that was really hard for me.
And I find that very interesting because I've seen the show too, and looking at it from a guy's perspective, I just sort of found it very dark and depressing. I mean, just very depressing. But
I think it's a heavy show no matter where you're at.
But I didn't have an emotional reaction like you did, and I think that's a very interesting point, though. Do you think you would have responded differently when you were a single woman?
Yes, I do. Not that I didn't love children and respect women or want the best for them at that point, but when you have a baby, there's this bond, this connection that, I mean, you can't experience it until you have the baby. Like, nothing will replace that. And so I went home, and all I wanted to do was hold my son all night long, because I just felt like if something were to take him away, or someone were to try to take him away, how would I even feel about
So
that?
were you feeling fear or anger?
Both. I felt anger at the entire situation and fear and this like heavy dread that I don't want to feel after watching a TV show.
And
I want to just comment on one other thing you said. I think your response shows that, well, two things. It's difficult sometimes to separate ourselves emotionally, even from something we know is not real.
Yeah.
And so we often hear this whole idea, entertainment doesn't really affect us. It does.
Yeah.
It's actually designed to create a deep emotional response.
And that was the thing I was just going to say.
Sorry, I didn't mean to steal
No.
your thunder.
I mean, I think that's a great point. The fact is that I think the people that create these kinds of shows, who might have a specific agenda that they want to promote, the fact is that if they can get you angry or fearful, those are emotions that are very usable.
Very powerful.
That are
Very
powerful.
And it's a show that definitely has an agenda.
Exactly.
And we're not
Yeah.
going to go too far down that rabbit trail, but,
Yeah.
but they have a point they're trying to
And they
make.
can
Sure.
motivate you to take steps in your own life or to take steps in society based on that emotional connection, that fire that they can stir up with their drama. That's the great thing actually about drama is that it connects so closely to us and in negative and positive ways.
Yeah,
Well, I wanted to say the other thing that you said that I thought was significant was you said you prayed. And we're often asked, how do we deal with some of this stuff? And whether you're a plugged-in reviewer or not, sometimes you may be exposed to something in the entertainment choices you make that really does impact you emotionally and negatively. And it's a wise and good thing to go to God and say,
100%.
Lord, I'm feeling this way because of this show. Would you
Yeah.
help me understand it? And would you help me to yield that to you so that it doesn't continue to affect me in a negative way? And I think that's something we can teach our children as well, because we want to teach them discernment, and that's part of the process, because we
Yes.
don't always make perfect decisions.
Yeah.
And let's face it, there are a number of times that we put ourselves in those situations almost accidentally.
Yeah,
You
totally.
know, we're like you were asked to review this.
Right.
But you might have just been scanning through the TV dial and saw something that you
Yeah.
thought looked interesting, and then next thing you know, you are where you are.
Yeah. Or our kids see a commercial for a horror movie while you're watching American Ninja Warrior. Or,
Right.
you know, it's sometimes we see things that we have to go back and deal with our family and
Yeah.
with ourselves.
Anything else you want to add about that?
Well, I just think that it's a good opportunity when you see something like that to really take it as this is an opportunity for discernment. Like, how am I going to break this down? How do I feel about this? And
Right.
it's important to pay attention. Like, if
Yeah.
something bothers you emotionally or in your spirit, like, there's a reason and it shouldn't be ignored. And so taking that into consideration and kind of moving from there is
I
important.
think that's very wise.
Yeah.
All right, well, good stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All right,
Bob.
we'll leave you with that. What we'll do is also link below to Kristin's review, so you can see her full review. Put a link there to a blog that Paul Acey just did recently about the power of story,
Yeah.
which I think will be fun for you to read. And then, of course, we want to welcome you back to further discussions about media and discernment and all kinds of fun things. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming.